these two. Really actually quite honoured to actually work with both of them this year. Alan I've been working with since sort of the end of 2014, and Villy I've been working with end of sort of the last bit of 2016. He had come over to me just after the tour of Mauritius. Both of them are very similar in terms of like personality traits. Both of them are total A-type personalities. Just some characteristics obviously with regards to that is like a huge excessive ambition, very competitive, both believe, which is in red, quantity over quality, so they always want to do more and more, which sometimes isn't the greatest. Also huge overachievers. They enjoy structure, especially when it comes to training. If you just say to them, go ride your bike for 4 hours, they want to know how they need to ride it for 4 hours, which is something I try to just break them from being a robot, but that's one of the biggest problems I've had. And then the other one is they have huge expectations. They're never happy. If they win a race, they haven't won it by enough. And if they reach a goal, they kind of forget that was the goal, and they're now already halfway through achieving that goal. They want to now find the next goal. With regards to that, the one is also pretty intelligent with regards to his training, and the other one is Villy. So it's he's tough. Obviously, two different athletes in total, even though they are racing on the world stage. In terms of what they do, Alan's races are typically, if you take just cross country and specifics, are shorter. They're hour and a half in duration. His intensity is very different. It's just full gas anaerobic. And while his calendar is all year, he has sort of that 3-month block during the World Cup season, which is easier to hit form and hit a peak. Where Villy's races now that he's doing World Tour are typically 5 hours, or like a standard TSS for his races. For those that know, that would be sort of 390, 400. His intensity for the races is obviously lower, and his calendar also, because he is a super domestique, and it was his first year at Pro Tour, it was hard to try hit a target or a peak because all they did was just throw him at every single race. And they would also change his races. They would maybe phone him on a Thursday and say, you need to go race Paris-Nice tomorrow, which was always a bit of a problem. But we had tried to hit a peak sort of Tour de Suisse, because that was a goal, or the long list for a team to go to Vuelta, which he unfortunately missed. So just three keys to remember when it comes to training athletes is obviously training loads vary differently between, so what works for one doesn't always work for the other. Bigger and higher training tolerance to training loads aren't always guaranteed a performance. And then there's obviously, with regards to their history of training, what does and doesn't work. Where with regards to Villy's stuff, you'll see it was quite a change in what he had done previously to what I had started giving him. The one thing I do need to say is, while this is sort of data driven, there is some stuff I can't give you in terms of their personal numbers. Villy was a bit more open to it. Alan was kind of like a non-negotiable in terms of giving actual values out. He doesn't even load his stuff up to Strava unless it was a downhill, and that's as far as it goes. So, as I said, I got hold of Alan towards the end of 2014. He had come to me via another athlete, and we sort of had started working properly during 2015. He was just out of juniors, sort of very green in that around the ears, very untrusting as an athlete to kind of follow structure or what I was giving him. But just in terms of his progression sort of yearly is, if you look at his hours and that, I seem to be missing the one, 2018, sorry, but there was a slow progression in his hours, etc. during the year, over the course of the years. And then as his race days and his volume increased, I added more recovery days to his schedules. The 2018 over here, if you look, he's got 27 race days, and that was just because he had broken his wrist this year, as you knew. So we had missed 5 race days in total. He would have raced exactly the same in terms of race days versus 2017. His recovery days were exactly the same, and his hours were also very, very similar. We didn't change his hours much in terms from 2017 to 2018. So just these are obviously his from 2016. If we take, instead of going all the way back, is if you had to chart his stuff, his duration by weeks, etc. In 2016, his average TSS a week, believe it or not, was only 554, and he was doing 11.5 hours. And that was the first year he started doing something in terms of results at World Cups. He was getting sort of top 30s, which was a big goal for him at the time. 2017, we went up to just under 14 hours and 657 TSS a week. And then now 2018, as I said, his hours didn't really increase, but his intensity over there had shot up. We had increased its intensity significantly. This block over here is when he broke his wrist, and then this is just after Cape Pioneer, which he was theoretically meant to be off, but he never, because he needed the points to race first year elite next year. In terms of his progression on functional threshold power, when I started working with him, he was 63.5 kilos, where now he's pretty much stabilized on 64.5. He will race at about 64, but predominantly he's around 64.5. And if we look at his progression, as I said, I can't really give the exact values, but his progression over the years which wasn't really planned for, it was just 20 watts, 20 watts, 10 watts now. There was a very small change from last year to this year. But if you take it from the beginning to now, it's a 13.5% increase. And where you'll see the difference between Villies is, Alan's is just that standard sort of everyday progression that you would see, where Villies is, he had a very, very different path to this. Again, I ran his FTP at that sort of middle of what he is during the year and prescribed numbers of that. If we look at his peak power values that I chart during the year, and is what we look at, if you look at it specifically over here from 2015 to 2016 on both sides, there wasn't a lot of, in his longer numbers, so from 10 minutes to 60 minutes, there wasn't a lot of increase, and that was because we were still new working with each other, and we both thought that from a cross-country side, you needed to be explosive and have that sort of 5 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute efforts, which is what was important. Which once we started from 2016 and we realized we were actually so far off the mark, just in terms of once we had proper World Cup files and stuff like that, we realized that we needed to sort of increase, yes, like everything in total, but the 60 minute to 20 minute was actually the most important values, and that was purely from that sustainability during a race, where again, if we look at numbers, and then the 1 minute we had focused on was for that start into that first corner, or into the first climb, just to get that explosive, and the 5 second was obviously from the kick. So from 2016, if we charted all the way through to now, those were his improvements that we had focused on. And the 30 minute is, we had put quite a bit of strong focus on 20 and 30 minutes, purely from that sustainability. And then how we got there in terms of sessions, I don't know if any of you follow Mike and I over Instagram, and we have our office walls where we create sessions, but these are some of the stuff that we had done, which is theoretically a stochastic effort, which were longer durations, and with that, when I had prescribed this, which works well for well-trained athletes in terms of intensity, is these blocks over here would be sort of like your threshold FTP, maybe just below FTP, and these would be sort of your zone 5 efforts. What I had done, I had prescribed those on the absolute upper threshold of that. So his zone 4 efforts would have been pretty much at his peak value of zone 4. So if his top end of zone 4 is, say, 300 to 320, I would have those values at 320. And then those spikes would be absolutely all out. It works well with a well-trained athlete. It doesn't work that well with a non-trained athlete. They may get that one right, and then they phone you and they're like, oh, I'm not feeling so good. And you're like, where are you? And they're like, I'm on radial in the bush. And you're just like, well, give me your numbers. And they tell you they did like basically 400 for that. And you're like, you just went too deep. So it does, again, like it works well on well-trained athletes. And that sort of difference in variation in intensities and that it keeps it constant, but because with the cross country side, you get those spikes where you have to kick or you have to attack or you, etc. Obviously, we did start implementing that to a lot of other athletes and that, and it has worked really well. Getting to Villy, as you can see, it's not your standard charts. His side, as I said, I started working with him at the end of 2016, and if you look at his 2016 values over here, that was the hours he was doing in 2016, which was like 830 hours for the year. With that, he had 10 rest days that I found in his files, and he raced 49 days. So what I had done from that is, in 2017, I cut his hours down significantly. He had more race days because he had to do his South African calendar, and then he also had to go race overseas so he could try get his Katusha contract that he has at the moment. And then at the end of that season, I did give him 30 days because he was absolutely burnt. 2018, now he's on a 25-day break and he's on 56 race days, is what he had done. But that was also because Katusha had sort of thrown him into everything to get him used to it. If we look at his 2016 season in total, that is when I took over. So what I had done is I'd given him a break from that and then added structure into his and more consistency, where if you look at his training in that year, it was like big days, nothing, all over. It was really like throwing spaghetti on a plate when you look at his stuff. He had 755 TSS per week for the year and 16 and a half hours. Basically what he had done during the whole of 2016 has just got worse, and as he got worse, he had done more, essentially, thinking that he would need to train, and this is pretty much how his year had went, is he had trained and just gotten worse and worse. And when I'd gotten a hold of him, we were racing at Tour of Mauritius and I was racing with him. Again, 2017, what I had done then is we had built it in blocks, so there were as Mike had asked, there were his 2 blocks. So this was sort of his South African stint up until SA Champs, which was important for him. Gave him a break. A lot of this block was him traveling from here to there. Was his stint in Spain, where he was doing, he did 4 tours back to back, 4 8-day tours, literally back to back. So he had done a grand tour then, and then rested him up there. He had got the contract just after World Champs, or just before World Champs, and then we had started building him from there, and then that was a Katusha camp. And what he had done is, without rest blocks, his TSS, as you can notice, was dropped to 708 a week, and he was only doing 15 hours a week, and that was with those tours. What he had, if you look at his 2016 verse 17 in terms of lines, like, it's just a mess. It looks like my PMC chart, compared to his 2017, where he had a lot of more consistency in that in his training and racing. So yeah, his 2018 year, which was World Tour, as I said, like he really battled in terms of trying to find sort of consistency, because I would throw him in like just races at totally random. And Tour of Catalunya, he did break his collarbone over there, which he kind of got a Zwift addiction. 790 TSS a week with his injury, which was actually quite severe. It got infected. They had to do the operation twice, everything like that. And obviously his hours had popped up then to 18 and a half hours a week on average. But that's also, again, their races are 5 hours, stuff like that. Again, if you look at his charting, when I got a hold of him, he was 76. And obviously we had kind of lowered weight. There was also quite a bit of pressure from the team to lower weight. We did find when he got under sort of 70, 68, he was good for about 2 weeks, or like maybe a 5-day block of racing, but then it took him too long to recover after that. So we had kept him at sort of 70, 71 during the year, and he was good, but even that was it was actually quite a battle from times. His progression obviously from that was 20 watts and then 30 watts, plus he had lost weight. So in terms of that, his projection was huge compared to Alan's. Again, if you look at his charting, his numbers, exactly all his stuff was sort of all sub-threshold, so he was doing long efforts, but there was no prescription in terms of what he was given to make improvements. So we had kind of focused on everything, to be very honest. Like there wasn't something that where Alan and I focused on like 1 minute and stuff like that. Billy was just fixing the whole shop, and those were his progressions. And obviously with Pro Tour, their climbs are longer, so you want to try improve his longer efforts. But a value I do use a lot, and there is no science or anything behind it, but I do monitor an athlete in terms of their 10-minute power, especially in South Africa for racing. If an athlete's got a good 10-minute value, you know that they'll be competitive, because often the climbs are 10 minutes. If a gutter section it's normally a 10-minute gutter, and then they sit up. So that's, as I said, I have no scientific proof why I do that, but that is typically what I gauge. Like all these other numbers here, like I actually don't care. Well, I do, but I don't. But if their 10 minutes is good in South Africa, you can judge how good an athlete genuinely is. But yeah, so we had focused obviously quite a bit on his longer efforts because of Pro Tour. His sessions also, when I'd gotten his sessions before, it wasn't a very structured way of how he had done stuff. So he'd find like a 4-hour ride, and he would just do like 10 minutes on every climb, where it was hard to kind of get his like accurate data and compare sessions for sessions. So this is just an example of a training session that how you would want it done, where after like there's his intervals, doof, 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 and you would lap it, and it's easy to analyze. What I have shown this is what I had done with Villy a lot, which was brought up now in terms of the strength work. I'd done a lot of low cadence work with Villy, and that was throughout the year. It wasn't just like in January leading up to races, and that we'd even do it like midweek. So I'd give him strength work to do or low cadence work, and then I'd give him intensity to do after it, especially at the end of the week. And his adaptation to that and his improvement in terms of numbers was huge. It was really, really good. He hated it though. He always moaned about it, but he moans about everything. But like he moaned specifically about low cadence stuff, gym work. He really hates it. But his changes and his improvements were. These are 2 race files which we found very interesting, because I never really worked with someone that was racing World Tour. So if we take a short World Tour stage, which is typically about 4 hours, and then the longest one, which is now his last monumental year done, was sort of just over 6 hours, being Il Lombardia. The biggest notification of what we found is that he had always said, he was good to go during the race, and then that last bit is where there was a problem. So we thought, like he wasn't fit enough or he wasn't used to it. But when you started analyzing files, the winning selection, and if you go back and you watch races, or if you read the report on that, the winning selection was always a peak 5-minute value when things went down, and it was always on that last quarter of the race. And that is where your selection was made. If you made that selection, whether you lasted to the end was also another question, but that's typically where he was getting dropped. And we couldn't understand why, and obviously when we had gone back and we had looked at stuff, that was as clear as daylight. So what we had done over and above his normal training is we had given him some big rides, which had varying intensity during the ride. So this block in the beginning, what we also found is these are actually low cadence efforts. So at the beginning of the race, when there's not really much happening and everyone's sitting riding a tempo, on those sort of longer climbs, I would give, even during the race, he would run a low cadence. So whether that was to activate muscles or whatever it was, or even just give him confidence, he would run that in the beginning of the races, unless he was in the break, obviously. So when we set up some training sessions, these again were typically like low cadence, and then he'd go right on, and you can see this is just standard riding. And then these efforts here, which were typically between 2 and 1 minutes, it was normally 4x2s, and then 6x1s would be absolutely flat out hard as he can go. And then we had finally got a good response from it. Sometimes also these 2 would be low cadence, but typically we just left it at that, and that actually worked really well for him again. He had then eventually started making that 5-minute selection, but then when there was maybe another selection made, he had missed that, but it was progression of essentially of what he had done. This is which he also, whenever he's not meant to go in a break, really does. And this was our sort of when we're trying to hit a peak for the selection for Tour of Volta. This is stage 8 of Tour de Suisse, where he got in the break and he got the most aggressive rider because he just landed up like attacking everyone in the break and himself and stuff like that. So in terms of data, and what he had done, he had pushed, it was just over 3 on the 3-hour race, and he had pushed 4.5 watts a kilo for that race, which at that level, he was saying, which he did say, he said it was actually a pretty simple day in the break. But that was Willy's progression, and just like as a personality side, he's like everyone kind of, if you know him, he's like a bit loskop and stuff like that, but he's out off a bike, he's like, he is really loskop, and I hope he rides a bike forever, and I really mean that. But on a bike, his attention to detail on how he knows himself as an athlete is actually really pretty impressive. This is not really data driven, it's more just sort of how we landed up with Alan at his for his World Cup win, or his World Champs win, and some sessions and stuff like that. And how it all started was, where I believe his journey to it went, was when I got hold of him in 2014, our goals were, like a plan was like, what are we doing going forward? And it was, the first year he was just going to learn to race. 2016 it was like, let's go race World Cups, maybe get a top 30. 2017 was, he'd like to get in the top 10, and then obviously 2018, if he had reached that goal, it was to win a World Cup. When he had gotten second at World Champs last year, the goal obviously then was to win this year. It was actually like a non-negotiable. We were 100% on track leading up to Tankwa. Tankwa was a last-minute call to go race with Simon Andreasen, and he was at the end of in his transition phase, so we thought, fine, 3 days of good tempo would be actually good for him. And they'd won a stage. Simon was battling a bit with his back, and Sunday they'd sort of gone missing, and the phone, obviously you start phoning around, and the phone call came back, and that was Alan. That was his broken wrist. So we kind of put a bit of a spanner in the works in terms of where we were in terms of training, and you can see he's a bit antisocial at the time. And the one, obviously you can see it was a bad break. We did find out later after that, after some real emergency with Turin organising some doctors and getting him back to Cape Town, that he also had another broken wrist. However, he was happy. Pethodine's a fantastic unit, and there we go. So with his surgery, it was obviously he had stitches and some plates and stuff put in, and we were told no riding for 2 weeks until he had gone back for the checkup. And 3 days after that, we had organised him a kicker, and we were back on the bike. We did have some complications that week, and just in terms of, I think it was all the medication and that he had during the operation, and that he was good for 3 days, and then he actually was really bad and ill for about 4 days after that, and we had put it down to a bit of withdrawal from the pethidine or whatever he was on, and just his body was maybe just in a bit of shock. 8 days after surgery, he was back in the gym thanks to Mike downstairs with 2 broken wrists, and to the team down there, which was great. They adapted his strength stuff accordingly, which I think that picture is great, because in terms of you get phone calls from some elites or pros, as any coach, and you like, I can't train today, and you're like, what's wrong? And they're like, it's raining. I had a fight with my girlfriend last night, and you're like, well, so in terms of dedication, that was it. And during this time, it was actually harder to get him not to train because we had Commonwealth Games coming up. However, got tired of Zwift. He wasn't interested in the socks like Willy, and complete opposite. And from that, we had to make a plan much to the undercover from all the doctors, and we went to go get a brace made up. We took his handlebars over here, if you can see, so he could grab the handlebars and at least hold on to the bike with the brace that was being made up. With that, we got it going. The rules were obviously on the tar only, and he wasn't allowed to go off-road. which he stuck to, but it wasn't an issue. We did have a problem in terms of trying to get some explosive stuff out of him. Just because of his wrist, he couldn't really slam the bike in that. So again, thanks to Mike and myself trying to out-better each other, we had come up with some new really like weird sessions, and I'd stole some from Mike, and Mike had stole some from myself, which again were prescribed now the upper end of zone 4, and all these spikes were absolutely all out. Okay, you can't see the distance, but it does run far up. And that, again, trying to simulate that, a little bit of explosivity to get that kick in his legs. He had to do all of these seated, which, funny enough, actually had served him well for the rest of the year coming up. He actually adapted pretty well to that, and he uses that as a method now going forward. This is his PMC chart this is from when he got back on the bike, and this is Commonwealth Games. Pretty standard in terms of just like train, recover. And when we went into Commonwealth Games, he had a CTL of 86 and a form of -2. We knew we were in trouble, he needs to race higher than that, and obviously it is very dependent on some athletes. Again, like Vinny does well at 120, 125, Matt Beers also 125, 130. But here we knew that he wasn't in peak form, but we tried to do as best as we could in the short period of time that we did. Did land up on the podium. He did die, as I'm sure many of you watched, with pretty much half a lap to go, and it was quite savage. But again, got on the podium. It was a good goal, and then our goal, obviously, after this now was World Champs and to win a World Cup. He was out of the World Cup series because of his broken wrist, and he had missed Stellenbosch. So our goal was now just to focus 100% on World Champs. Again, a whole bunch of different sessions coming up. That is one that I had stole from Mike. That is one that I sort of created for myself. The intensity on this is you're looking at almost like a 0.98, 0.1 for the duration of these sessions. And it is a mixed bag of everything, and it's worked really, really well. Just in terms of leading to World Champs, how we had monitored his stuff is standard through a PMC chart, a DOL document, conversations on the phone and that. But how we had tracked whether we were on track or not was every race that he had raced up until that we had data on from a previous race from the year before, is we had charted them together. Obviously we had compared weather conditions, temperature, stuff like that, but the ones that were all similar, as you can see, this is one of the World Cups, is we had known, here last year he did 119, exactly the same. Here he had done 118.52 on the exact same course. So we knew at least from last year we were better. What we didn't understand, or what we didn't expect when he did come back to World Champs, is that yes, his level had increased as well and had progressed, but so did the rest of the people at under 23. So we're throwing a little bit, now when he was getting a fifth, it was actually really good, where before that fifth would have possibly been a win last year, which was caused a bit of a panic for Alan, but he does panic at the best of times. But that was one thing that we had charted and spoken about and used as a monitoring tool going forward to see where we were compared to last year's form, which was also good, and he did get podiums last year. So this is his annual plan. It is a little unconventional to the way normal periodization is done. Montanan, our goal was to podium, and he had won it. So going into that, we had sort of done a bit of a lower intensity and a bit uncommon to what Alan does previously to a race. Just in terms of intensity, but our goal was just to get a podium. He had won it. Our values up until then of what he uses as a standard normalized power and when he has form was on track. Although he didn't feel 100% during race day, which we actually put down to his stomach and some just nerves and stuff like that. From that, however, we did know we were on track. It was great. We had planned then after France to go to Levingo to altitude. He doesn't do well at altitude. If we are racing a World Cup at altitude, he'll try stay as far down the mountain as possible. So we try to get him, even if it's an hour's drive, during that he may ride half of the way or something as a warm-up, but we try to keep him at like sort of under 800 meters and then only go up to the track on either race day, or he'll go do his sessions on the track. Otherwise, if he stays at altitude and he races, he's useless. It's as simple as that. And that's a process we've used for the last 2 years, and it's done really well. After Mont Saint Anne is what we had done, where I said load and tour legs there, is we had given him an 18-hour week, and we had pretty much, it was structured, but we had sort of smashed him. So his intensity was slightly lower, but we had increased his load a lot. And that was just, Alan likes when you get tour legs, and if you know what that is, it's, if you ride like the Epic, you're able to produce a lot of power, but just constant power. And that's at a sort of a lower cadence. And we had done that then, and it worked while he raced a crit for Specialized in the one evening. That morning he had done an 8x4 session. So that day alone, on that one day, he had done 5 hours, which is a little bit like unconventional, but that week was a big week. He went into France tired, and that week leading up to France, it was low volume, but it was really high intensity. He had done 2 big intensity sessions prior to racing France, and the day before France, he had done 2 full-out sprint laps on the track. And the reason we had done that was A, to see how he felt, but also to get data on how he was going to go in terms of how the race was going to go the next day. We then packed up straight after France, and he went to Levingo. His first session was typically also his 3rd day, which kind of literature does show he's at his worst at altitude. So on the Tuesday, he had done quite a big complicated session, but we had done it at the highest point possible. He went up to 2,700 meters to do it. His numbers weren't the best, but we knew that it was going to be fine. Every day when he was in Levingo, I'd spoken to him. So we normally speak every single day, but he'd wake up, he'd tell me how he was, then he'd go warm up, he'd stop, he'd tell me how he feels after warming up. From that, although I had prescribed a session, if it wasn't kind of the sensations we needed, we'd change the session slightly. However, in Levingo it was fine, but we did do that sort of these 2 days. Then after that, again, he'd do the session, come back, he'd upload the data to me, I'd speak to him once again to tell me how the session went. Data tells me one thing, Alan tells me another, and then we'd plan the next day. So although I had charted that whole week for him in terms of training, it was almost day by day is how we did it. His last session that he did in Levingo, I sent him down to the bottom of the mountain, like right to the bottom. I think it was like almost 400 meters. He had done 20 by 1 minute, which was prescribed. What we had changed then was 15 by 1s and 4 by 2s instead. Huge session in terms of intensity and load, but it was great. Like he left there, he said the last 4 minutes were some of his best, the last 2 minutes were some of his best he had ever done. What we had done throughout towards the end of the year is, say normal periodization, you go 90% intensity, 95% of max, 100, and then you taper and go and race. What we had done, we had sort of moved it around a bit, where you can see over here, he had done 90%, like we had done 100, 90, and then 100 on race day. And we found that he would do a load of training, keep the intensity high to like a week out. He would sort of adapt better to that. Even though he was tired, he would adapt better to it. And then we'd smash it here. And once he got that load, he was absolutely phenomenal. That session, which we came up with prior to race week during World Cups, was a standard session. One being he hit numbers, and he was also confident if he did well on that session. So this was 8 minutes all out, hard as he could go. These were 4 minutes, also pretty much as hard as he could go, to like 95% effort, and then these were 1 minute. And that session was, and if you look at Alan, the next slide, you'll see is like, the intensity is how it kind of OCD he is with stuff, is that if you give him a number to hit, he'll do it. And here you can see it's like 86, 150, etc. It was, and if you chart it, that's what that session looks like. Like, you don't often get data that's literally on the lines as you want him to get it. And again, I'd given him a range, so you can see here is sort of his range of values, and he had kind of hit sort of the middle upper echelon and that was at 1,200 meters. So he doesn't typically do well there at that, but yeah, he had hit it spot on. And that's, yeah, what I had found is that we had gone hard, sort of 100% effort, or 95, 90, 100 prior to race day, and he had adapted well to that. I have tried that with some other athletes now, and it also has worked well. His PMC chart, again from June, leading up to World Champs. This is World Champs over here. Again, 97. We wanted it to be around about 100. He was 97 in a form of 1. Typically, when he had won St. Anne and stuff, he was 103. So within that range, we were good. I was actually worried that he had tapered a bit too much, and he was going to be too fresh for on the race day when he had dropped from that. Although he had told me, which was it caused a bit of panic 2 days out from my side, and he kind of panicked from that. But it worked out when I just said to him, "How do you feel?" and he was like, "Strong as an ox." Like it was good. Went into the race. Obviously, he had won it. Our goal, also something different, what we had done on the race day is he had taken his palm, we had agreed that he took his palm meat off and he didn't ride with the Garmin. In terms of power, there was 2 reasons for it. The one was it was 200 grams weight saving, and the other one, I didn't want him to look at numbers, or we didn't want to look at numbers. So if he's at, say, 500 watts and he knows that's sort of an upper value for him, I didn't want him to mentally crack from it and go, "Oh, I can't keep this as a sustainable." The reason we took the Garmin off was because even if you didn't have a power meter, you'd have a heart rate value. So even if he was higher and he wasn't used to running a sustained heart rate, again, mentally he would have cracked. His race, how you watched it, was also like 100% exactly how we had sort of planned it. It was start off, sit in the top 5. Halfway through the race, which was lap 3, he said, he's going to go tips up for 1 lap and see whoever comes with him. He did that on lap 3, and there was sort of only the 3 guys that went with. Eventually, Blevins was the only one, and which was our agreement, was that then on the last lap, technically he said he knew he was better than everyone else. So if you went through the start straight and you went up that sort of like bridge up to the top, and then there was quite a technical descent down, and we said no matter who was with you at that time, in a perfect world, you need to attack on that. It was a 4-minute effort. We knew his 4 minutes were really good. We had put a lot of focus on that. If he got to the technical, he said he knew he could get, if he got there with a 10-second gap, he knew he could open another 20, 30 seconds by the bottom. And then obviously you got to, it's all hell for leather. And he attacked, he obviously got to the top, and the rest was history. And you kind of sit back and you think to yourself that, yes, it worked out in a perfect world, but I don't think any of us could ever do that again. I'll be very honest. It was like, it was kind of amazing.